advocating for a national day of remembrance, a COVID Memorial Day of sorts. Does the president support a national day of remembrance, a COVID Memorial Day?
Well, Peter, I would say that we're still in a fight against COVID, in a battle against COVID. There are still far too many people getting sick, getting hospitalized, and dying. And this is not the last time we will commemorate, or the last step that the president will take to commemorate, but I don't have anything to predict about the future.
I imagine the same applies to a COVID monument, right? You don't have any decisions made on that.
Those are all important questions, and as the president has said before, people who have lost loved ones, obviously 1 million lives have been lost. There are a lot of people across this country still in mourning. He recognizes that. We need to continue to commemorate that, but we're still in a fight with the virus.
So on this day, 1 million American lives lost, an unimaginable figure only 2+ years ago. At 400,000 lives lost, the president, then president-elect, and vice president-elect were there at the Lincoln Memorial. 400 lights, 400,000 lives. For 500,000 lives lost, there was a moment of silence on the South Lawn. Today was a bit different. His only public comments were pre-recorded remarks to the global COVID summit. I guess I'm asking, why not a more prominent remembrance for today's anniversary,
I would say first, the president publicly addressed this day and marked it. We also lowered the flags for 5 days. They will be lowered for 5 days, and we will continue to mark and commemorate the lives lost. What people care about the country, though, most is our action and what actions the president will continue to take. And obviously, since he took office, according to a Yale study, it's estimated we've saved over 2.2 million American lives and $900 billion in healthcare costs. There's more work that needs to be done, more work to fight misinformation, more work to get more people vaccinated, and action is what people care about.
People care about transparency, as you indicate as well. So my last question on this topic is, can you help people better understand what data Dr. Ashish Jha was pointing to when he warned that the U.S. could potentially see 100 million infections in the U.S. if COVID relief isn't passed now over the course of the fall and winter waves expected?
There's a range of studies that are ongoing. Dr. Jha talks to a range of people internally, health experts, and externally, and this is in the range of what they have conveyed to him directly. And I expect there'll be more studies that come out in the coming months. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jenna. As you know, North Korea is on lockdown because of a case of COVID there.
Just one case.
Yeah.
Remarkable.
The country has previously rejected offers from COVAX for vaccinations. I'm wondering if the White House will launch a renewed push to try to get vaccines to North Korea. Obviously, almost their entire population, or their entire population, has not been vaccinated.
Yeah, you're right. And as you noted, the DPRK has repeatedly refused vaccine donations from COVAX. We do not, the United States does not currently have plans to share vaccines with the DPRK. We do continue to support international efforts aimed at the provision of critical humanitarian aid to the most vulnerable North Koreans. And this is, of course, a broader part of the DPRK continuing to exploit its own citizens by not accepting this type of aid. As you know, it's not just vaccines, it's also a range of humanitarian assistance that could very much help the people in the country, and instead they divert resources to build their unlawful nuclear and ballistic missiles programs. But yes, we support international efforts. No current plans for the U.S. to donate, from the United States supply.
And then just briefly on crypto, as you know, the crypto market is in something of a tailspin. There's been an executive order that was put out in March to look into regulations and study the issue. Does the process need to be sped up now, given what we're seeing?
Well, that was significant at the time. I know it was, only about 2 months ago, because there had not been an acknowledgement about the need to look into crypto, both the benefits and the challenges. And it's an ongoing effort to do exactly that. I know that those who are running it from the Department of Treasury and otherwise want to make sure it's thorough and that they're assessing both of those important questions, the opportunities and the challenges. So I would point you to them on whether there could be any effort to expedite or whether that's possible.
Rory, who is from Nick News?
I know Rory. We've met. Rory, go ahead.
Hi, I just have a question and a follow-up. So first, there are concerns about the negative impacts of social media on the mental health of children. Will the White House take any actions to prevent these adverse effects?
As a mom myself, Rory, my daughter's younger than you. She'd think you were very hip and cool, no doubt. This is a huge concern that we have, the president has, is the impact of social media platforms, their enormous power, and the fact that it is largely unchecked. It is certainly something that our Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, has talked about in terms of the impact of social media platforms and what the impact they're having on the mental health, the self-esteem of young people. And so I would say the president, the first lady, all of us believe that more needs to be done.
And the internet has become a tool for children's education. A lot of students use the internet to learn. So how will the White House prevent children from getting misinformed from the internet?
Such a good question, too. Well, I know reporters like yourself and people that other kids listen to are good voices to provide accurate information. And you coming here and asking tough questions is an important part of that. I would say that, one of the things that we encourage parents to do is, make sure you are educating yourself on all of these platforms and what information is available, and working with your kids to make sure they understand what's accurate and inaccurate. There's certainly steps the government can take, but there's also an ongoing development of new tools, and we as parents need to keep educating ourselves about what's out there so we can make sure our kids have access to good information, informative information. We watch a lot of animal videos in my house. That's all good and positive, and not access to information that's inaccurate, misleading, or problematic. Go ahead.
Thanks. It's much better than Portnoy, so.
Yeah. Hard confirm. Go ahead.
Our friends at Reuters reported that there's no executive order being drafted to give HHS and DOJ new powers to block Chinese access to vulnerable, to Americans' sensitive information. And so I was wondering if you could give a sense of timeline on this, but also the idea that there's been frustration with the frustration within the administration over some of the slow walking of commerce on rulemaking and investigations, and that may have prompted this action by the president.
Well, I would say that certainly the protection of the privacy of American citizens and ensuring that no foreign actors, whether state-owned or otherwise, have access to the information of Americans is of utmost concern to the President, to our National Security Advisor, and others. These processes can take some time to develop, to investigate, to finalize. It's not a surprise if there is a frustration by anyone who's a part of that process, but I can't speak to that from here. But I can tell you certainly ensuring we are protecting Americans' privacy is of utmost concern to the President.
A minister in the Bolsonaro government said that he may skip the Summit of the Americas coming up because he wants to campaign. If he's not going, Mexico says that they may not go because Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua may not be invited. Are we reaching a point where this summit may no longer be successful because so many key leaders in the hemisphere, even though one's obviously that the president's had key disagreements with, won't be attending?
Well, no invitations have gone out for the summit. So that is obviously something that will happen in short order, given the summit is coming up in June. I would note that Secretary of State Tony Blinken spoke today with his counterparts and reiterated not only his appreciation for the continued collaboration we have with Mexico, but also noted that Special Advisor for the Summit of the Americas, Christopher Dodd, will travel to Mexico later this month to further discuss preparations for the summit. So these conversations are ongoing. Obviously, important questions about what the final invitation list will look like. We are certainly eager to host the summit, something that is our highest priority for the hemisphere, and it would be an important opportunity to talk about a range of issues, including democracy, including climate goals, including the COVID-19 response, and addressing the root causes of migration. So we are fully planning and moving forward, but no final decisions about the invites have been made yet.
And then the last one, there was a report earlier this week that the president may be meeting with or speaking to the King of Jordan. Obviously, also, I think we asked last week about this possibility of a regional summit in Israel, so I'm wondering if you could confirm either of those things, and specifically on the last point, whether Saudi Arabia is being weighed as a participant in that summit. Oil production, obviously, a kind of primary concern for many Americans.
Yes. Okay. First, yes, he will be meeting with the King of Jordan. I can get you the details of that after the briefing. And on the second part of your question, I think you're referring to what his travel might look like in June around the other summits. We're still finalizing what that looks like. There have been good questions about whether or not he will go to Israel, given he has committed to Prime Minister or accepted the invitation of Prime Minister Bennett. But that trip, we're not quite there yet. We're still finalizing the next trip. We have had senior members of the national security team travel to Saudi Arabia to talk about a range of issues, including regional cooperation, obviously the war in Yemen, and supply on the global marketplace, but I don't have anything to predict in terms of an upcoming visit by the president. Go ahead.
Yeah, back on infant formula, Senator Gillibrand in an interview with NPR said that this is a life or death issue and that the other companies aren't stepping up, they aren't producing as much formula as they should or could be, and that she's going to ask the president to invoke the Defense Production Act on this. Is that the kind of request that will be entertained?
Yes, we're exploring every option. I think when you look at the Defense Production Act, you have to ensure that it would actually achieve what you're trying to achieve, and so we're also looking at that as well. And we have been working, this is one of the reasons, obviously, the president called CEOs today of some of these vital companies to determine what more can be done, because we know that with one major supplier having part of their supply off the marketplace, one of the easiest and fastest ways to address that is to increase supply from some of the other suppliers, and also to import more, which is a step we're working to take as well.
They didn't happen to ask him to invoke the Defense Production Act, did they?
I'm not aware of that being a specific ask from them. I can see if there's more to read out from the calls as well.
Okay. And just quickly on the COVID deaths, going back to the group marked by COVID, they're also asking the president to meet with people who've lost loved ones, to express his empathy and also sort of feel what they're feeling. When is the last time he met with the loved ones of people who've died from COVID, and would he consider such a meeting?
He certainly would, and I think even people who may not like the president probably would not question his level of empathy and compassion for people who have lost loved ones, and certainly addressing and talking about that impact is something you hear him do nearly every time he talks about COVID. He certainly would be open to doing that. I don't have anything to predict in terms of the future schedule, but yes. Go ahead.
Jen, some of the steps, at least two of them announced today on infant formula, seem like things that could have been announced steps that could have been taken earlier, and any woman following this on any mom's list or whatever has known of rumblings of this crisis since nearly the plant shut down in February. Why did it take so long to announce the steps you announced today?
Well, again, some of these steps we've been working on just because we haven't been announcing them publicly, including increasing supply and working with producers and suppliers. Some of the challenges we're also seeing, let me just note it, and I noted this a little bit earlier, is this hoarding issue, and we have been calling on retailers to impose purchasing limits to prevent the possibility of hoarding, because we know that is an issue. Again, sometimes it's people who are fearful, which is understandable, but also it is also, there's an element of people who are trying to benefit financially off of that fear, which is where we have a concern. But since the recall, we've been working nonstop to address and alleviate supply issues by working with these retailers, engaging with the FDA on additional steps we could take, and obviously we're talking about laying all the specifics out now. Go ahead.
Briefly, on a different topic of ultra MAGA. Now, you saw Representative Lee Stefanik saying, "I'm ultra MAGA and I'm proud of it." former Trump super PAC blasted out a T-shirt of him as an ultra MAGA Superman. He, on his own Twitter alternative platform, released a meme of him as the ultra MAGA king. I guess I'm curious what the administration makes of Republicans and the former president sort of co-opting this and elevating what President Biden clearly intended as a pejorative.
Well, I think if that means that the individuals you mentioned are embracing their opposition to a woman's right to make choices about her own health care, if they're embracing a plan that will raise taxes on 75 million Americans, if they're embracing the importance of fighting Mickey Mouse over virtually any other issue, I guess that's their platform. Good for them. We're happy to have a debate about that. Go ahead.
Jen, at the risk of sending you back to your State Department days, I was wondering if you could come back to the embrace of Sweden and Finland for NATO, and walk us through the distinction now between their qualifications and Ukraine, now that we have invested so much more heavily in making sure that Ukraine remains an independent state and that it irreversibly could not be invaded again.
Well, I would leave that to my NATO spokesperson colleague to speak to. What I would say, David, is that what we support is a NATO application by Finland or Sweden, should they choose to apply. We know that they have been close and valued defense partners. There are a range of requirements I'm sure my NATO counterparts could speak to, including addressing a range of issues like corruption and how you would participate in the defense of the collective NATO alliance. But I will let them to speak to that. We of course support the NATO's open door policy and the aspirations of any country to apply to join. But I think this speaks to our long-standing relationship and military partnerships with Finland and Sweden.
So you're saying that for Finland and Sweden, you're supporting their application, their right to apply, but you're not embracing yet whether or not you would actually...
We would support a NATO application by Finland and Sweden, yes.
Okay. And then take that the next step for us, if you can, which is to say that you've heard what the Russians how they've reacted to this. Given the debate that took place back in the 15, 20 years ago about expanding NATO and the president's concerns at that time, does he think that expanding it again just risks further provocation here? And is the benefit at this point of having them in the alliance greater than the risk of the provocation?
Well, I would just like to quote the president of Finland and what he said, which I don't think I could state it better in response to this question, which is, as it relates to Russia, you caused this, look at the mirror. That is, NATO is a defensive alliance. It's not an offensive alliance. Both Finland and Sweden are close and valued defense partners of the United States and NATO. They're thriving democracies. They've worked closely with NATO for years. There's no aggressive intent from NATO, from the United States, from Finland or Sweden. Obviously, they can speak for themselves, to Russia. But again, this is President Putin who caused this. Look at the mirror. And I think that also probably is the reason for what you've seen as public support for joining NATO increase in these countries as well.
Go ahead. Thanks, Jen. One on the COVID summit, and then if I can, a follow-up.
Sure.
Tam was asking about the DPA. During the summit today, did the U.S. hear any concerns from other countries about the delay in securing U.S. funding for the global effort, or that there's a potential that that funding will not come through if Congress doesn't move forward on it?
I don't have a thorough readout on it to point you to other countries to speak to what they did or didn't express. I would note that the Vice President, in her comments, specifically highlighted the need to get additional funding, including the $5 billion that is for international COVID relief, which is part of the 22.5 we requested. And she did that because there's a recognition, acknowledgement that we want to continue to be part of this effort, to continue to lead this effort. And without that funding, we won't be as well positioned. I would note that what is a success from this summit is, of course, the fact that we have been able to put together $3.2 billion in contributions from a range of countries attending to this global effort, and that was part of the purpose to ensure that we were elevating this, working together, coordinating, to prevent complacency, to prevent deaths, to prevent and plan for future variants. And that kind of money from other countries is an important step forward.
And to follow up on the DPA question, obviously baby formula is a very specific product, but is there a lesson that can be learned from the COVID supplies of PPE and vaccines and scaling up production that the administration could apply to this situation? Right now?
That's a very good question, Karen. I think one of the challenges in the cycle of the supplies here is that companies are going to produce what the market needs, right? And if you look at things like tests or masks, back in the fall, remember, we had a shortage of tests. The summer, we had an abundance of tests to the point where companies were shutting down manufacturing. So the challenge is that it's about what the demand is in the marketplace. And obviously now there's high demand because there's a shortage because of this recall, which was done again to save babies' lives. Clearly our efforts and focus now is on increasing supply from other suppliers and importing more so that we can meet the current demand and needs now. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Another one on baby formula. There are families with babies who are sick and relying on specialty mix that I understand are only manufactured in this plant that is offline now. So what's the plan for those families?
I addressed this a little bit yesterday or the day before, I guess it was the day before, which is part of our effort is to ensure and work with other suppliers who make baby formula who can meet the same needs of children who have special needs or who have specific needs for what formula they can take to ensure that supply is on the marketplace as well.
On this whole,
and the FDA has been doing that, but go ahead.
On this whole supply chain issue, we often hear the president saying the solution to supply chain problems is to produce in the United States. In this case, we have a product that is manufactured, I think, 98% in the United States. So how do you reconcile these two messages?
Because the reason for this shortage is not because there was a supply chain issue in a foreign country. That's a different issue. That's one supply chain issue. This issue is because there was unsafe product that the FDA recalled to save babies' lives. So it's just a different issue. Go ahead.
Thank you. A senior administration official yesterday said that the president's trip to South Korea and Japan later this month is part of his plan for Quad policy, and he's the first administration to raise it to the leadership level. But the president has plans to visit other two countries, Quad countries, India and Australia, and when that is going to be.
I'm sure he will in the future, but we have 2 foreign trips we're still trying to finalize at this point, and so I don't have any predictions about when.
Is it going to be the first term of the president?
I can't make a prediction of that, but there's a lot of time left in the first term, so that's the good news. A lot of time for travel.
And the second question, what is U.S. expectations from India on the 2 wars the world is fighting? One is the Ukraine war, other the COVID-19.
Well, we continue to remain in close touch with India about, our efforts to rally the world to stand up against Russian aggression. That means implementing and abiding by sanctions that have been put in place. And as you know, Dilip took a trip, our Deputy National Security Advisor took a trip just a few weeks ago there to have a conversation about that. We continue to encourage countries to speak out about Russian aggression. And obviously on COVID-19, we've been an important partner with India in providing supply and vaccines and needs in their times of need over the course of the last 15 months, and certainly we'll continue to work with them on that. Go ahead.
Thanks, Shireen. One on Finland, one on Israel. When Russia threatened military technical means against Ukraine many months ago, you were sounding the alarm bells. You were giving very specific projections as to what the Russians were going to do. They've invoked that term again after Finland's announcement. What do you make of it? What are your concerns about Russia's response to this?
About Russia's
Finnish application for NATO membership?
Well, I would say that the facts are important here, which is that NATO is a defensive alliance. NATO has no aggressive intent against Russia, nor does the United States, nor do Finland and Sweden. We have all long supported, before the invasion, after the invasion, the open door policy, and certainly given Finland and Sweden have long-standing important partnerships with the United States, with NATO countries. They're long-standing democracies. That's why we support their application. But beyond that, I think it's important to note what the facts are here, which is that there's no aggressive intent at all.
On the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh in Jenin, you called for an investigation, a swift investigation. I guess the question is, what kind of investigation? The Israelis have extended an offer for the Palestinians to participate in a joint investigation. Should they be accepting that offer? And they've also asked for U.S. oversight over some examination of, for example, the bullet that killed Shireen. What have you responded to that offer? What would you like to see?
Well, we understand that both Israel and the Palestinian Authority are already conducting investigations into the circumstances of the killing. We encourage both parties to do so thoroughly and transparently and to share their findings to ensure that all evidence in this case is available and fully assessed. We stand ready to assist either party in any way that we can. Neither side has asked for our assistance at this time, and such a request would be required in order for us to do so. Go ahead.
So as part of this ultra MAGA rollout, the president has talked a lot about sort of what he thinks the Republican Party now stands for. He's also, thrown out some tough language, saying they were petty and mean-spirited and sort of cowering to former President Trump. Does he? But he's also said he's been surprised by that. Does he still feel like the fever will break in Washington?
Well, you mean in terms of the ultra MAGA followers of the former president?
If ultra MAGA, as he says, controls the party, that would be the party that he thought would come around.
Well, I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question. Are you asking me if he thinks that there will ever be a period of time where there will not be a ultra MAGA party, or if
does he feel like there will be a period in time when he is president in which the ultra MAGA wing of the Republican Party doesn't control it, and that the fever will break in Washington?
Well, that's certainly his hope. The president has long believed that Democrats and Republicans can work together to get things done. He signed 80 bipartisan bills into law last year. The Bipartisan Innovation Act is something we're still working to get through. And his view is that this is a conversation, a lot of it's happening in Washington, and they are, for the American people and the American public, a lot of these policies that the ultra MAGA wing, the MAGA king, all the different terminology where the president's using out there, is not aligned with where the vast majority of the public is, and elected officials should be doing what the vast majority of the public wants them to do.
Does the excuse me if you guys have already reacted to this, does the White House have a comment on the latest round of subpoenas by the January 6th Commission?
We certainly support the work of the January 6th committee. We'll continue to support their work. We believe it's vital and essential to get to the bottom of what happened on January 6th, one of the darkest days in our democracy. So we'll continue to support their work. Go ahead. Okay, last one. Go ahead.
Jen, staying on Ultra MAGA and the Rick Scott
yeah.
Obviously, the president himself is not subject to the Hatch Act, but as the midterms start to take over basically everything, can you just talk about how the White House is navigating the distinction between political speech and official events?
For and what the president is doing, or how he spends his time?
In terms of the appropriateness of making explicitly political or campaign-focused messages during official White House events.
Well, I would say that I am subject to the Hatch Act, as I've noted, in a sternly written letter to me. But the president is not, as you know, and he is the leader of the Democratic Party. He's also the commander-in-chief. He's also the leader of the free world. And what he is pointing out is what he sees to be a troubling trend in our country. That's a threat to our democracy, a threat to progress, and certainly he's going to continue to draw the contrast for the American people on what the options present. All right, I'm just going to do Patsy and April because Patsy, go ahead.
Jen, so on the U.S.-ASEAN summit, can you give us a sense of how hard the president will push on the issue of Ukraine? For example, whether the administration will be pushing to include the word Russia in the final communique. As you know, ASEAN have so far avoided using that word on any of their statements on the Ukraine crisis. And I have a follow-up on Afghanistan, if you don't mind.
Sure. So on the ASEAN summit, Ukraine will absolutely be on the agenda in terms of what the final communique will look like. I don't expect it will be ready for more than 24 hours, and there's lots of conversations that need to happen between now and then, so I can't make a prediction of it. But I will say that a number of the ASEAN participants have been important partners in calling out the aggressive action of Russia in invading Ukraine, in participating and supporting sanctions, and certainly abiding by them. And obviously the conflict we're seeing is a unique moment in modern global history. So it will certainly be on the agenda. Okay, go ahead, last thing, and I'll go to April, and then I gotta go.
Can you confirm reports that Jake Sullivan recently met with the chief of the Pakistani spy agency in Washington, D.C.? Can you share anything from that meeting and whether the two sides discuss counterterrorism cooperation in Afghanistan?
I don't have any details on that reported meeting. I can certainly check and see if there's more. Okay, April, wrap it up.
Yes, wrapping it up. I need to share on another meeting, if you can share some more information. Congressman Greg Meeks, the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, met with the president, was part of a group meeting with the president this week, and he talked about issues that he talked with, President Zelensky. And one of those issues that President Zelensky specifically brought up to Meeks and the contingent was Ukrainian grains and how it is impacting the lack of Ukrainian grains going out to the world. It's impacting Africa. Meeks said the president spoke about it. Can you drill down a little bit more about this? As the president has said he wants it to go out to the world, he drilled down a little bit more, especially when it comes to Africa, because there's a concern about many of those countries, to include Ethiopia and Congo, that's already going through crisis.
Yeah, it's an important issue. We're seeing food shortages in the world, including in parts of Africa, other parts of the Middle East. This is one of the reasons why the president went to Chicago and raised the issue of doing everything we can to increase supply here in the United States. While we don't expect shortages here, we want to be providers of American grains to the rest of the world, as we're seeing shortages in part because of the war in Ukraine. We've also provided a large amount of assistance to global food programs, global aid programs, in anticipation of what we see as a potential shortage of food, and we'll continue to do work on it.
I'm sorry. Give the president more pause. That President Zelensky himself brought that issue of grain for Africa up, specifically Africa, the continent.
Well, we are working on this issue and have been working on this issue for months now. That is, the president went on a trip just yesterday to elevate and talk about the steps we're taking to increase supply of grains and wheat here in the United States to address exactly this issue. And we are far and away the world's largest provider of assistance and aid to global food programs in order to address what we know could be a shortage around the world. Thank you, everyone.
Jen, as you prepare to hand over the torch, what are your greatest regrets? doses, all part of the pledge we made to donate 1 billion doses of vaccine to the most vulnerable in the world. You know, all this is completely free. No strings attached. But you know, there's still so much left to do. This pandemic isn't over. Today, we mark a tragic milestone here in the United States. 1 million COVID deaths. 1 million empty chairs around the family dinner table. Each irreplaceable losses. Each leaving behind a family, a community, forever changed because of this pandemic. My heart goes out to all of those who are struggling, asking themselves, how do I go on without him? How do I go on without her? What will we do without him? It's grief shared by people across all of our nations. Around the world, many more millions have died. Millions of children have been orphaned, and with thousands still dying every day, now is the time for us to act, all of us together. We all must do more. We must honor those we have lost by doing everything we can to prevent as many deaths as possible. Today, we're at a new stage in fighting this pandemic, facing an evolving set of challenges. We have to double down on our efforts to get shots in people's arms, country by country, community by community. Ensure we have reliable and predictable supplies of vaccines and boosters for everyone, everywhere. Expand access globally to tests and treatments. And we have to prevent complacency. This summit is an opportunity to renew our efforts, to keep our foot on the gas when it comes to getting this pandemic under control and preventing future health crises. Collectively, we're making significant new commitments to help keep up the fight against COVID-19 in 2022, protect the most vulnerable populations, and prepare for the next health crisis because there will be others. You know, and the United States is going to continue to do our part. Today I'm announcing the United States will share critical COVID-19 technologies through the World Health Organization COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. We're making available health technologies that are owned by the United States government, including stabilized spike protein that is used in many COVID-19 vaccines. We're standing up a new pilot program, working with the Global Fund to expand access to rapid testing and antiviral treatments for people in harder to reach areas. And we're increasing our support for a new pandemic preparedness and global health security fund that will be established at the World Bank this summer with $450 million in seed funding. I particularly want to commend Indonesia and Italy for their leadership in helping make this fund a reality. And I'm encouraging other leaders to join me in upping their commitments. You know, we're going to face together global health crises. This is not the last one we've had. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So we have to invest now. We have to secure political commitment. How can we save more lives? That's why I continue to call on Congress here at home to take the urgent action to provide emergency COVID-19 funding that is vital to protect Americans, to make sure that we maintain our supplies of COVID-19 tests, treatments, and vaccines, including next-generation vaccines that are being developed. The request also includes $5 billion to keep up our global partnership in the fight against COVID-19 and sustain our efforts to get shots in people's arms all around the world, expand access to treatment, and save lives everywhere. We can do this. We can control COVID-19. We can start to build a better, healthier, and more secure future today if we all do our part and if we step up together. So thank you for responding to this fight, and most especially, thank you for all the doctors, nurses, and community health workers, and scientists, and aid workers, and anyone and everyone on the front lines fighting this pandemic, saving lives every single day. We owe you. Thank you. God bless you all.
Good morning, everyone. Today I'm joined by my colleagues with the House Republican Conference. Right now, families across America are struggling to feed their babies due to a horrific nationwide baby formula shortage. And I cannot think of a more harrowing, panicked crisis for parents to face than desperately trying to find food and formula for their newborn babies. I've led on this issue since February, and we as House Republicans continue to demand answers from the FDA. And unsurprisingly, when I reached out in February from my office to the FDA, we received no substantive response. Joe Biden simply has no plan. In fact, when Joe Biden's White House was asked about the shortage, they laughed. Shameful. Make no mistake, there is nothing laughable or funny about this crisis. As a new mother, I understand personally the severity of this challenge. My son Sam is 9 months old. He is formula fed, and even in my trips to the grocery store in upstate New York, the shelves have been fairly empty. And there was an article just today about families having to drive hours to access stores that have formula. Think about the cost of gas for families on limited income. So today, House Republicans are here to push for action from the FDA and the Biden administration, who should have had a plan for this shortage months ago. Instead, bare shelves Biden has continued to pass the buck. Biden and the FDA needed to work directly with the manufacturers and hospitals to make sure that we have an adequate supply of baby formula and make sure that parents know where to go if the shelves are empty at the store. Think about this. Babies have been put to bed hungry while parents are desperately trying to find alternative formulas that are often difficult to procure. This is not a third world country. This should never happen in the United States of America. We are unified in demanding action to address this crisis. I'm turning it over to my colleague, Ann Wagner, who is a mom and grandmother and has heard firsthand from her constituents. Ann.
Thank you. I thank our conference chair greatly. I am Ann Wagner. I represent Missouri's 2nd Congressional District in the suburbs of St. Louis County. This is sadly Joe Biden's America. Working families are already struggling to put food on the table due to the skyrocketing cost of everyday items. And now they are facing a crisis that is threatening the very lives of their newborn children. This baby formula shortage is hitting mothers all over the country, but especially in my home state of Missouri. Missouri is just one of 6 states in America that has more than half of its baby formula out of stock. Business and retailers are rationing supplies. As you can see, this is from a local store, limiting the amount of formula that a customer can buy. The St. Louis Crisis Nursery, an amazing organization dedicated to supporting at-risk children, has been pleading for donations of formula so they don't have to turn away families in need since the end of February. This is absolutely unconscionable. As a mother of 3, and as Elise said, a proud grandmother of 2 and another sweet baby on the way, it is terrifying to think of the desperation that parents in my district are feeling when they cannot provide the basic necessities that they need for their children. I've heard stories of moms firsthand, my own daughter-in-law, bartering for baby formula on Facebook. Pregnant women are asking if they should start stockpiling. They're anxious during a time of high stress and anxiety. That should never be happening. It is purely due to the blatant incompetence in this White House and the Democrats who haven't even scheduled a hearing until the end of May. This has been weeks and weeks since the end of February. I will fight for these resilient mothers and fathers who are already dealing with so many challenges, and I assure you that my Republican colleagues that stand with me today and in the rest of our conference, they will do everything in their power, in our power, to get the Biden administration to take action to fix this life-threatening crisis now. I thank you, and I now hand the podium over to our chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, a wife and mother herself, my good friend, Kathy with no changes.
All right. In Washington State, moms, support groups, nurses have been telling me that this is the biggest crisis that they have faced as they face the shortage of baby formula. Families are turning to the internet because they are so desperate. It is extremely dangerous. You think about moms going to the grocery store and having an empty shelf. In some cases, they're driving for hours in order to get the baby formula that they need. And they certainly don't need to be facing empty shelves. We shouldn't be rationing formula to keep their babies fed. And some families, they rely upon specific formula. I talked to one mom who has a baby with allergies, and it's extremely difficult. She feels like she's playing Russian roulette as she goes to the store. President Biden and the FDA must do more. This is a matter of life or death. What will it take for the Biden administration to reverse its inflation, supply chain, and energy crises that are making the shortage worse? On the Energy and Commerce Committee, as well as with my colleagues in the conference, we are asking the questions. We've been raising the alarm to President Biden for months. We've been seeing the empty shelves. We've been seeing the rising cost on families. We also have concerns about the Abbott recall and how it is impacting shortages. On behalf of every parent and caregiver who is unsure as to whether they'll be able to feed their children, we need answers and we need accountability. I want to thank our conference chair, Elise, as well as Ashley Henson, everyone who is here representing parents and grandparents. I'm a mom of 3 kids. We will not stop until this shortage is fixed. And with that, I'm proud to introduce my colleague Patrick McHenry, a longtime leader for parents and grandparents and our families here on Capitol Hill.
Excuse me. Well, as a parent of 3 young children and one that we're looking for formula for, I'm here to tell you that I know that parents are struggling in America. The Biden administration has made every aspect of family life more difficult. Go to the grocery store, you see the rising price on the shelves of every available thing, and yet you also go to the grocery store and see the lack of availability of key things that you need for family life. And now we see the lack of access to baby formula. And we ask why? Well, this is not just a supply chain crisis, it's a crisis for families to be able to feed their children. And it's incumbent upon parents to provide a safe environment for their children. We try to reduce stress in a very stressful time for our children as well. So we're asking the question to this administration, how are you prioritizing this? What actions are you taking to relieve the pain of families? We just had Secretary Yellen testify before my committee a few minutes ago, and she says, well, for the administration, it's all hands on deck for inflation. Well, we have to ask them, what are you actually doing? What does it mean? And so when it comes to baby formula, people can see this for themselves, what this administration has brought in terms of regulatory policy, and then the lack of competence in responding to firm desires within society, firm needs within society. And that's why we're here today, to raise this question. This is not meant to be a partisan exercise, but we've come together because we don't see Democrats raising the same issue and willing to work with us to get some answer from this administration. So we're demanding answers, and that's why we're here today.
We're next going to go to Stephanie Bice from Oklahoma, who's been a leader legislatively on this issue.
Thank you, Elise. All too often, Republicans are called pro-birth, or we're told that we only care about children before they are born. This is simply not true. In fact, it is important that we continue to support and advocate for policies that help Americans from birth throughout their lives. To this end, yesterday my good friend Randy Feinstra from Iowa and I introduced H.R. 7718, the Formula Act, to try to combat the severe formula shortages that we are seeing across the country. As a mother, I know firsthand how this can impact a family. Although my girls are older now, when my youngest daughter was born, we learned that she had colic and needed specialized formula to help with the effects of it. I can't imagine dealing with a colicky child and not being able to find formula to help combat that. I've heard from many of my constituents back home that are struggling to find formula on the shelves. House Republicans are dedicated to finding a solution, and we have one. Speaker Pelosi should bring the legislation that Republicans have presented to the floor immediately to try to solve this crisis for American families. Thank you, and at this time I'd like to introduce my colleague, Randy Feenster from Iowa.
Thank you, Chairwoman Elise Stefanik. Thank you for putting this together. You think about this, under the Biden administration, we hear crisis after crisis after crisis. And here we have another significant crisis. In Iowa and in the Midwest, we have women that can't find formula for their infants. Literally cannot find it, or they're traveling from anywhere from 50 to 75 to 100 miles to try to get it. This is not right. This is a very serious situation. So with my colleague, Congresswoman Bice, and myself, we put together a solution that we can find formula, we can bring in formula from other areas to make sure that these mothers have formula for their infants. This is so important. I wish the administration would finally understand the seriousness of what's going on. With that, I'll turn it to my good friend, Blake Moore.
Thank you, Elise, and to my colleagues, Reps Bice and Feenstra. We're always going to be about finding solutions, so appreciate you putting forth an actual solution that we can get behind. That is something that we as a conference are heavily focused on. This nationwide baby formula shortage we're currently facing is a major crisis for all American families raising infants. Particularly those who face financial hardships and have to travel far distances to search for formula. My wife and I, we have a 6-month-old son, Franklin. He was born a month early. He is dependent on formula. He had to undergo a surgery. His esophagus and his trachea were conjoined, and they had to separate these two. Spent a month in the NICU. Our ability to nourish our child entirely rests on formula. This is fundamental to every single young family that exists, and having this option. I think, and I compare it to when my now 9-year-old was born. He was born at Georgetown Hospital the very day before Hurricane Sandy hit back in 2012. Many of us may remember that. I went to the grocery store while my wife was still in the hospital, and the grocery aisles were empty. It was the most nervous as a dad, and I'd only been a dad for like 6 hours. It's the most nervous I had ever been, knowing that this child was dependent on me, and that was a blip. It was a weather-related issue. A few days later, grocery shelves were back up. We were back up and running. That's what America does. But we're just not seeing that in the Biden administration. We're having constant, persistent crisis after crisis, and this is another one of these. And this is this is so much more concerning than anything weather related. We're not in the pandemic issue anymore. We've got to get our FDA and our supply chain process going again and coming with real solutions. We need immediate action. I urge the Biden administration to take this as serious as it is for every single family out there that's got this this pending issue with grocery shelves being so barren right now for oftentimes self-inflicted reasons. And we've got to be able to get out ahead of this. Let our industries operate and do what they know they can do in this amazing American economy, and let it thrive. Thank you very much.
We will next go to Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Thank you. Food security is national security. And right now we have a food security crisis for the most vulnerable of Americans, the ones that we cherish the most, and that's our babies. Moms and dads all over the country, some of them are traveling hours every single day looking for baby formula as they can't find it in their local grocery stores. They're reaching out to friends and families and making new friends in Facebook groups and online as they're searching to find baby formula. Even mothers that have been giving their babies baby formula are now searching out breastfeeding mothers looking to buy an extra supply of milk if they're willing to share it or sell it. This is a crisis that should never be happening, and this is completely, squarely on the shoulders of the Biden administration and the Democrats that are controlling our government. You see, this didn't start just last month. It was July of last year when baby formula shortages started. And that happened because of COVID lockdowns and the complete crisis and shutdown in our supply chains. Now with rising inflation and fuel prices, this is going to continue. This is not going to remedy itself quickly. We also have overregulation through the FDA, and this has been going on for years. Label requirements, shipping requirements, and very strict rules when it comes to baby formula. So it's not just getting a supply here at home, it's difficult to get it from overseas. When you have mothers crying in grocery stores because they can't find food to feed their babies, that is a critical sign that we are in a country in despair, we're a country in crisis, and we have to do everything we can to change it. Here's what we know. This government is failing the American people, the taxpayers and its citizens. Pictures are emerging today from the border where the Biden administration has been sending pallets of baby formula for illegal mothers and their babies, while American mothers and babies cannot find baby formula. This is completely unacceptable, and this needs to end now. I have one thing to say, and this is something that it's hard to even imagine, but we cannot trust our government. If you're an expecting mother, I strongly urge you to do the best you can to try to breastfeed your baby, because you cannot depend on this government that is supposedly running our country to create the right conditions in our economy for you to be able to find baby formula. And this should never, ever happen. I thank Congresswoman Stefanik, I thank my colleagues that we're all joining together to work on this, because this is a situation that is critical, and we have to do everything we can to shore this one up and get it fixed immediately. Thank you very much.
We will next go to Mike Waltz.
Thanks. Thank you, Congresswoman Stefanik. Mike Waltz from Florida. Look, I think we need to take a moment and think about the fact that in Joe Biden's America, it seems like it's easier to get a crack pipe in a government-funded smoking kit than it is to find baby formula. I'm a new father of a 4-month-old, and the other piece is that this crisis has been brewing for months. Since my 4-month-old has been born, I've had my entire family across 4 states scouring shelves looking for formula for which he is dependent to survive. And Elise, you mentioned third world countries. I've served in third world countries. I've seen the effects when infants have to subsist on formula that's been cut in order to spread it out, or no formula at all, or water, and the stunted growth, the mental capacity that's affected is sad, and it's heartbreaking. This is not a third world country, last I checked, but some days it feels like it lately. And what have we heard? What have we collectively heard from from the Biden administration since we've been raising this issue? Silence, crickets, zero, nothing. Nothing at all. And that is unacceptable. We're going to do something about it. Thank you so much. I yield my time.
We will next go to John Rose.
Thank you, Chair Stefanik, and thank you for bringing together this group today to talk about this important issue. I am the father of a 1-year-old son, Sam, who uses baby formula, for whom we use baby formula, and so I know how serious the shortage of baby formula is, not only at our household, but for parents all across this country. And quickly, it is becoming another crisis at the feet of our President Biden. Like most parents, my wife and I went through trials with our baby to figure out what worked for him. After breastfeeding for several months, my wife began to transition Sam to baby formula, and like so many parents have experienced initially, that wasn't going well. He was experiencing stomach aches. Eventually, we found a sensitive formula mix that worked for Sam, and all was well. Unfortunately, today, we aren't able to find that mix like so many Americans, and as a result, we see Sam experiencing some of the stomach issues that he began with early on. This is unacceptable. We live in one of the greatest countries in the world where food should not be a question. And so it is really shameful that the confluence of all of the bad choices that this administration has made over the 1+ years that they've been in office have led us to this point. I also represent a mother from Gallatin, Tennessee, that I believe is emblematic of the problem. She has an 8-month-old little girl who she recently had to go to 6 stores and then ultimately travel over 6 hours to find formula that her young baby girl could tolerate. Republicans concerned about this asked the FDA commissioner, what action is the FDA taking to address the shortage? And a series of other questions. And I'm happy to share this letter with you today if you'd like to see it. All we've heard from the White House is that the FDA is working around the clock. The same answer we see so often. Well, apparently they're not very effective working around the clock because they've yet to be able to provide us with real answers about how they're going to solve these problems. The president yesterday was in the Midwest raising money for the DNC. But I say to the president, the shelves are empty, Mr. President, and so are your words. If I have to go to the FDA myself to get answers, I will, because the bottom line is parents want answers to what this president is doing, and we deserve those answers. Thank you. And now Claudia Tenney, my colleague. Representative Tenney.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman Stefanik, and thank you to all my colleagues and all the mothers out here who know how hard it is to get the formula right now. I'm also the mother of one who had issues just like Congressman Rose's baby with sensitivity. He was a very large baby, and now he's 6'5", and he's very healthy because we didn't have a supply chain problem back in the day when I was a mother. But now I am an aunt, a new aunt, and my new niece is unable to get supplies either, and she's in Texas. And so I also have a staffer who just had a baby, my little adopted baby Gus, who is also not able to get baby formula for his needs. This is a problem that is not going to go away, as my colleagues identified. There has been one crisis after another every day, and there are many more to come. And it's because of this administration's economic illiteracy and their refusal to understand how to solve these problems or even to address the problems. So Americans need to brace themselves, because this isn't going to end until we have an administration and a Congress that is going to stand up for the American people, use common sense and good economic policy to make sure that our small businesses, our large businesses, and our supply chains are brought back. And I'm so grateful to be with colleagues who have that kind of background and are going to continue to fight for us. And I appreciate the new legislation that's been put in by my other colleagues. So thank you so much, and I really appreciate this press conference. Thank you.
We'll next go to our final speaker, Tim Burchett.
I want to thank you, Chairwoman Stefanik, and thank you. You've got a new title, but the best title you got is Mama.
For sure.
Being an unrepentant mama's boy, I can tell you, that means a lot to me. but I come from the great state of Tennessee, and it's been hit the hardest. My state's formula sold-out rate is about 50% right now. That's why I'm calling on the Tennessee Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney General to vigorously investigate any potential instances for illegal price gouging and stockpiling. Imagine somebody gouging the price of baby formula. To me, that classifies them in the dirt bag category, and they are. Even with these formula shortages for American babies, there are reportedly, as I stated earlier, pallets of baby formula possibly being distributed at the border. Now, these poor immigrant babies are here of no fault of their own. But if it wasn't for President Biden's continued failure at the southern border, we would not even be discussing this issue right now. This feels more like putting America last rather than America first. With the economic might of our government, we should be able to free up enough formula for our American babies. Just this weekend, we celebrated Mother's Day, and this week, it seems that all these mothers are doing now is worrying about feeding their babies. In the United States of America, folks, that is unacceptable. And thank you, Chair Lady, so much.
Thank you. As you can see, this is a unifying issue because it's really a crisis that impacts every family. Again, as a new mother, I can't think of anything that makes families more panicked than not being able to feed your baby. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Yes, sir.
Ms. Stefanik, is there any way to have perhaps the Defense Production Act or some other means of quickly trying to mitigate this shortage?
I mean, look, this administration should be looking at any and every single option. What we have heard from them is not only nothing from the FDA, but we also have heard laughter just yesterday with the newly appointed press secretary. That is laughing in the faces of mothers and fathers across this country. There is a reason why the Republican Party is the party of parents. It's not just because of education, it's because we are advocating on behalf of families across the country. Next question. Yes, sir.
I just want to be clear, like when you say everything, the Defense Production Act is on your menu of things that they should be considering.
This administration should show leadership. Let's remember how effective President Trump was when he cut through red tape to develop historically speedy vaccines through Operation Warp Speed. Congress's role was to make sure that we funded that we conducted proper oversight. This administration should be looking at everything and anything. We have heard absolutely nothing. We're talking about the President of the United States who simply doesn't care, whose only statement from his administration has been laughter in the face of mothers and fathers. So, of course, they should be looking at any opportunity. Yes. Yes, you heard from Randy Feenstra and Stephanie Bice, the Formula Act. That's been introduced. There will be a number of Republican colleagues on that bill. House Democrats' plan is to have a hearing 2 weeks from now. I can tell you as a new mom, families and moms and dads and babies can't wait 2 weeks. It needs to be happening now. Where are any of the Democrats talking about this issue? They're not, because they don't care, obviously, and they're woefully out of touch with families that are working hard to make ends meet, and now they can't find formula, and they are struggling to fill up their cars and their tanks of gas to travel 50, 100 miles to scour the grocery store shelves. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to my colleagues for highlighting the importance of this issue.
Good evening. My name is Sean Doran, Fire Captain and Public Information Officer with the Orange County Fire Authority. Thank you for joining us today for the press briefing for the coastal fire. Today we have two speakers, Orange County Fire Authority Division Chief and Incident Commander Shane Sherwood, and Orange County Sheriff Department Captain Asuncion. We're going to take individual speakers, and at the end we'll have questions all at the same time. Thank you for your cooperation.
Good evening. My name is Shane Sherwood, spelled S-H-A-N-E, Sherwood, S-H-E-R-W-O-D, with the Orange County Fire Authority, and I'm an incident commander for the coastal incident. I'd like to start off with a couple numbers and updates for you. Currently we're at 200 acres. We have a 15% containment. Right now, I would like to take the moment to thank all of our assisting agencies from LA County, Riverside County, San Diego County, and especially thank you to CAL FIRE and their resources. Without their assistance, we would not have the success that we have currently. Talking about damage and destroyed structures. Currently we have 20 destroyed structures and 11 damaged. And that assessment has been completed, and we continue to work with the City of Laguna Niguel to handle and address any of the impacted residents in that community. Talking about our upcoming weather, we still had afternoon winds, and we expect the weather to get hotter and drier over the next 2 days, so that'll still continue to challenge all of our firefighters in our efforts toward containing this fire. Currently we have 550 firefighters assigned to the incident. We have reported a second injury. I am happy to report all of our firefighters that have been injured have been assessed at the hospital and have been released. For the community, we want to take a moment and say thank you for all their patience. We are continuing to work diligently in all of our efforts to not only contain the fire, but to address all of those that have been impacted with their homes, and we will continue with that effort. But we want to thank them for their patience, and we will continue to work diligently each night until this fire is put at 100% containment. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Captain Virgil Asuncion, V-I-R-G-I-L, Asuncion, A-S-U-N-C-I-O-N. And I am the Chief for Laguna Niguel Police Services. First of all, I just want to reach out to the community and those individuals that have been affected by this fire. My heart goes out to you. We have approximately 900 residents evacuated from their homes in Laguna Niguel. We want to thank those residents who evacuated quickly, that assisted us to get our jobs done. We know we've lost some homes. This is devastating and has major impacts to our entire community. We are here to support you and support the city. Evacuation orders remain in place at this time. Updated maps of evacuation areas and road closures can be seen at ocsheriff.gov/coastal fire. The question on everyone's mind is repopulation. We have received more than 1,250 calls to our hotline. Most are asking about when they could go home. It is vital that it is safe to repopulate for the residents and for our fire personnel that is fighting the fire out there. The worst case scenario would be allowing people back into their homes, then having them to re-evacuate. We ask for patience from our residents. Information will be shared about repopulation on ocsheriff.gov/coastal fire and on the Twitter page of the Orange County Fire Authority at OC Fire Authority. Road closures remain in place. We ask anyone who does not have a legitimate reason to be in the area to please stay away. Again, thank you to our partner agencies and to the Laguna Niguel community. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time and for being here. At this moment, we're going to open it up to a few minutes of questions. And after that, we'll conclude. In advance, thank you for your time for being here today for our 5 o'clock press briefing.
Chief Sherwood, can you address, Chief Fennessy's talked a lot about climate change and the impact that he believes it has had on what's happened here. Can you please address that, the drought, the wind, climate change?
So I can comment on a few things. And so in the firefighting world, some of the things that we look at are what impacts or what drives a fire is the fuels, the topography, and the weather. And when all three of those come in alignment like we had yesterday, we have the devastation that we see today. So the fields are extremely dry, as we know. Where the homes are located there off Coronado Point and Vista Montemar, they sit directly above some drainages that channel the winds. And the winds yesterday were extremely fast, extremely strong. And when all three of those components come together, there is very little that the firefighting efforts can do. The biggest thing that we want to do is get the folks out of the way. That's where the evacuations come into place. And so that's unfortunately what we had in the situation here on the coastal fire. It was really those fields being as dry as they were, the strong winds, and the alignment on the topography is what created the devastation. We are very fortunate. It is not more homes, and we have no loss of life, which is fantastic, and in our mind is success. So currently the investigators are still working on the cause, so it is still undetermined at this time, and they're still working on that. I don't have a comment. That investigators are still investigating what the cause of the fire is.
Chief, we can see that the smoke, a lot of it has gone away since yesterday. Is the thought that containment might escalate here in the next day?
Absolutely. I would expect the escalation of the containment as the days to come. However, we still have a lot of work, not only in the vegetation side of it, but also throughout the homes that have been impacted by this incident.
Chief, you mentioned 20 structures destroyed, 11 damaged. How many of those are like actual homes? You just said structures.
I'm sorry, all of those are residential homes.
Chief, on the southwest side of that fire, we have noticed there may be some yellow-red tape covering some area. Do you know if that is a possible ignition source? Do we have any idea if this is what you guys are looking at where the fire may have actually started?
So not knowing exactly the area you're speaking of, saying the southwest, if you do see fire line tape out there, that could be an area of interest. It also could be a hazard on the fire line. I can't comment exactly what you're talking about.
Chief, how many stations do you have working on this fire?
How many? I'm sorry.
How many separate stations do you have helping with this fire?
I don't have exact stations. We have 550 firefighters on the fire line, and as I said, we have resources from LA County, Riverside County, San Diego County, as well as from CAL FIRE.
CAL FIRE came in and helped with a lot of air resources last night, yesterday afternoon and last night. Could you have used more?
I would love to say we could always use more, but yes, absolutely, CAL FIRE was instrumental in the success we had with this fire. They were instrumental in bringing in all the fixed wing, as well as some of the rotary wing that we saw. As of last night, it was OCFA's helicopter that was responding after the sun went down.
Would you have liked more resources in the air?
Gosh, we would always love to have more resources, so yes. However, we were able to have the success we had with the resources we were able to acquire.
From a personal perspective, what was this like to just witness this devastation today in a community that you probably know and hear?
It's tragic. Feel for the residents. To lose a home is, I can't imagine. We don't really have a season for the fire season these days, as you have seen. Here just locally in the county, we've had fires back since February, the Emerald Fire. We had the Gym Fire in March, and now here we are with the coastal incident here in May. So the fields unfortunately are extremely dry, and Mother Nature, when the winds blow like they do, like I said, most importantly is we get the residents out of the way and make sure that no one gets hurt or tragically lose their life.
Chief, can you talk a little bit more specifically? You said it's going to be a busy night ahead for the fellas. Can you talk specifically what they'll be doing in the canyon and up in some of those neighborhoods?
Yeah, absolutely. So today's, we work 24 hours, so we have firefighters on the line 24 hours out there, what we call mopping up. So they are making sure that any hot spots down, especially like in the brush area, have been mitigated, and we're either using hand tools or we're putting water on the fire to cool those embers. More importantly, up in the residential areas where we did have the damaged and destroyed homes, they are continuing to monitor and suppress all the fire within those homes, because our priority is to get those neighborhoods repopulated. But until those structures are addressed, we can't bring the residents, any residents, back into that area.
And I imagine some of those structures, by the looks of it, possibly could collapse, right? They've been threats.
Absolutely, that's always in consideration with our firefighters, and that's number one priority for us is the firefighter safety. So we have to be diligent about those structures that are already compromised.
Landscaping around homes up in that area, trees may have been too close to these structures. It could have acted as a ladder, getting flames up into the leaves, things like that.
That's always a concern, but I don't have a comment on that. That is something definitely we will address after, very similar to what we did in the 93 fire at Laguna Beach, what we did with the Emerald Bay community.
Do you have a recommendation sheet for people who have older homes? These houses were built prior to the new standards in 2007. And Chief Fennessy indicated as he stood there last night, he was seeing the fire start from the top and burning down into the roofs, into the eaves, into the attics. Any recommendation for people with homes knowing that this situation is not going to get any better as the months march on?
Sure. So my recommendation, if you went to ocfa.org, we have not only we have a program called Ready Set Go. So it's not only setting up our residents to be prepared for a situation like this, but additionally through our website, we'll come out and we'll assess your home, and we'll assess what we call home hardening to see how prepared your home is for an incident as the coastal fire. And we'll make recommendations of where maybe your home is vulnerable. So I would recommend folks, if you are concerned of things like that, that you reach out to our website, reach out to our headquarters and our folks, and we'll come out and we'll do that assessment for you.
Chief, we'll take one more question at this time.
Was so extreme. Do you worry that with higher temps and more wind gusts, you can see reignition?
So I think I got all of your question. You're talking about asking a question about embers and the hot weather coming in, and do we worry about reignition? So absolutely, that's always on our concern. That's why you see the efforts you do right now, and we have firefighters that'll be out 24 hours until what we call put this to bed, or we have 100% containment, because that is always concern is those embers. Especially in the homes, they can be latent and hidden, and they could take several days or several hours for those to appear. As far as potentially being another fire. So absolutely, we take that very seriously.
You guys talked about the quick reaction force program. Is that something you would like to see year round instead of just portions of the year now that we're seeing fire season never end?
So I'll go back to the other question that was asked. Would we love to see more aircraft? And the answer to your question is absolutely yes. Quick reaction force is very large helitankers that bring a lot of water at one time, and that would be very valuable to the fire service. Thank you. Great question.
All right. Thank you all for your time and coming here today. We appreciate you supporting us, getting the word out, sending the message about our efforts out here. And
Spencer was in possession of. This next image that I'm going to show you guys is one that has not really been out in the public, and it's from inside of Mr. Spencer's, actually inside of his home. So you can see here that, again, he has a very clear view. Here's the sniper stand that's there, one of the bullets that went through the window there, but just a very clear view of what his target was. And these next images, the image up in the far left he fired a number of shots through a screen there, in addition to the shots that came from the sniper's rifle, but there were a number of shots that were fired through the screen. One of the handguns with the extended magazine there, that's in that middle picture, and then those firearms is just as they were. You look to the top up in the right, you see like it has like a green sheet or something. That's the bed, the sniper's bed that he had. Again, and this was, those are not our desk in there. With those are all things that are originally just as they were taken as a result of what MPD found. And you look at the bottom pictures, you see a number of shell casings, you see another number of bullets. Those are very similar, obviously, in terms of caliber. What bullets were fired from the sniper's rifle. And again, he had several of these rifles laid out on the table, and they were certainly ready to go. Some additional images for you guys. I'm not exactly sure why the smoke detector was covered up, but the smoke detector had like a painter's covering over top of it, as if they were, as if something was going. We don't know if it was to conceal it because of smoke or something that will be coming from the firearms. That would be my guess. If there's smoke, if there's rounds being fired, and you have smoke inside the apartment, it could very well set off the fire alarm. So the smoke detector was covered. Again, another one of the drum magazines that he had. This lower picture down here to the bottom left is actually inside of the bathroom, and as the community knows that we've reported on, that's the location where he actually took his life, inside of this location. That little device that you see right there, we now know is the monitor for the camera, which is the next piece there, the camera that he had in position in the hallway so that he could see officers who were responding. And again, just a demonstration of the firepower that he was in possession of to do what he did. So when I say that this could have been a lot worse than what it was, I mean that in the literal sense. This really could have been a lot worse than what it was. He certainly had the firepower. He certainly had the will. We know that, and the mindset to do what he did on this particular day. These are some nasty rounds up here, and they do a lot of damage. So we wanted to share these things. And the next picture that you see here is just one of the images and measurements of the rounds, so you can see that in comparison to some of the other rounds that we see, the smaller caliber rounds that we oftentimes are seeing on the street, like 9mm and the like. This is much larger round. In addition to that, we served search warrants on his home in D.C. as well as his home in Fairfax County, and we've already reported about the number of firearms that were recovered here in D.C., which were 6 that were fully assembled, and in Virginia, 3 unassembled firearms, but certainly with the capacity for him to assemble those firearms. The firearms were purchased legally in the state of Virginia, but I should add that he was not licensed here in D.C., so technically they were illegal firearms here in our city. We work very closely with our partners in Fairfax County to really work through and get all of the evidence that we could from the location in Fairfax County. In this last slide, before we really turn to questions, just an update on the victim. So we know the 12-year-old female victim. She was actually walking through the elevated bridge. To the pickup location after school when she was struck, and obviously we're happy that her condition, she is in better physical health, but obviously still dealing with the trauma of this. The 56-year-old male retired police officer, he remains in the hospital. As I said, I went to visit him recently, and he is doing much better and appears to be coming out of the woods, so we're happy about that. The 47-year-old female, in this case, she was sitting in her vehicle outside of the school at the pickup location when she got struck and was treated and released. And then there was the 63-year-old female who had a slight graze wound. She was treated on scene and released. So those are the formal slides, and then I'm getting ready to just really kind of turn over to the team very briefly for them to make some brief comments. Again, normally this is not something that a space that we've operated in where we talk so openly about cases, but I think it's important, again, for community to really kind of see the depth of this investigation, what we were dealing with, and there's still a lot of things that we don't know yet. For example, his financial means. We know that he racked up a significant amount of debt on credit cards, thousands of dollars worth of debt on credit cards, to purchase things that he purchased. We know what the last thing that he ate before this incident happened. We know those things. But in terms of some other things with respect to him, we are still tracking down that track. We know that he separated from his family at least a year prior to this and really had not really been in contact with anyone. We know that he didn't have, we're not really finding any friends. And so when you say a true loner, this individual, at least for the last year or so and prior to that, really defines a loner in my view. So we'll have a little bit about the investigation, a little bit just about the on-scene stuff, and then Carolyn's role in this, and then we'll open it up to any questions you guys may have. So I'll turn to Josh, and Josh, anything that you want to just kind of talk about in terms of how the investigation is going.
So again, I'm Joshua Branson. What we've done is we've, as the chief has said, we've gotten all his financial records. We're working on, we got his credit report. We know what financial institutions he was utilizing. We're waiting on a response from those financial institutions to get more detailed information. We're attempting to, we have not found his cell phone, but we do have his phone records, so we're going through all that. We've attempted to speak with the majority of his neighbors. Those who were willing to speak with us didn't know him, and therefore they've never seen him with any friends. They've never known him to have any company as a department. So right now, on that front, we don't have any friends. So if anyone, in the public eye knows this individual, has had conversations with him, feel free to come forward and speak with us. Any witness information is completely confidential, so all witness information is completely anonymous to the public. I mean, not to us, of course, but the anonymity of witnesses is paramount to the police department, and to keep people safe and the free flow of information. We know the cause of death, which is important. Him killing himself. We've spoken with his family, who have been, they're going through a tough time, as you can imagine, so therefore they're speaking with us. They've provided a little bit of information. We've spoken with his school. At this time, he just looked like a young man, didn't have any problems going on, kind of kept to himself, like the chief said, and then moved out one day last year, and that's the last thing of any known associates we know of as of right now had any contact with him. Kind of dropped off the grid, if you will. So there's certain things that we're trying to get into at this time that takes time. Nothing's overnight, but that's where we're at right now.
Thank you, Josh. And Duncan, I want to turn to the commander on the scene. I was talking to Duncan several times back and forth while I'm in Boston and he's here on the scene, just to make sure that he's getting the support that he needs. Obviously, the rest of the team was here doing that, but for the district commander, being the person who, this is really resting on your shoulders and your community, and people looking to you for leadership, your troops and your communities and so forth, depending on you. You just kind of want to talk a little bit, Duncan, about your experience there. That would be good.
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Duncan Bedley. I'm the commander of the 2nd District. I'd say the two things that come to mind are relationship and readiness. Relationship with our local law enforcement partners, both federal and local. That was key on that day. We had United States Secret Service Uniform Division that were there practically in real time. University of the District of Columbia resources were there to assist us and guide us. And then on the readiness part of it, having discussions with our officers about how to respond to these events were critical. So many of you recall in the media the day prior, Thursday night on April 21st, there was an incident at 4500 Connecticut Avenue where an adult female fell from a building. We implemented certain things on that scene that were pivotal in helping us to be ready for this active shooter incident near the Burke School. And having those discussions and making sure folks were engaged, to me, was a true highlight, now allowing our officers to get there quickly and to respond cohesively.
Thank you, Duncan. And Carolyn, for your role, you were more behind the scenes, kind of doing the things that you do. Carolyn makes magic with a lot of stuff that happens to support us as we're out on the front line, but if you want to just kind of talk a little bit about your role, and then we'll go to questions.
Thanks, Chief. Yes, my name is Carolyn Montagna. I am the director of our Joint Strategic and Tactical Analysis Command Center. One of the components of that is our Command Information Center. So I got the call pretty immediately that we were having an incident occurring in 2D. So we started making sure that the proper resources were, for those folks that were down on the street, ensuring that they had information. What we started also doing is kind of coordinating with our partners, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, some of the local and federal partners from around the area as information was coming in. What was really key for us that day is some of the public posts, basically pushing us social media posts of this individual that I have a team of investigative analysts, they're called criminal research specialists, that really dug into some of those posts, where were they coming from, worked with JTTF to do some additional searches to get more information about this individual. And as they were getting information from the streets, I was on the phone with Detective Branson probably 10 times throughout that day and just pushing information back and forth and ensuring everybody knew what we were seeing and kind of putting the pieces together as they were working their investigation.
Thank you, Carolyn. So one other person, and he could not be here with us today, but Officer Peterson, who was the officer on the scene working outside employment at the school. Just a real hero in my book. He really is. He was the guy, or the first guy on the scene, making the assessments and doing the things that needed to be done, really to let everybody else who was coming in to the situation know what was going on. Oftentimes, when you hear you have a shooting or you have victims, officers will rush in to a particular location, and had they rushed in to this particular location, I don't even want to imagine how many police officers or first responders we might be talking about right now had they rushed right in. So that collected, coordinated effort between the supervisors and the managers that were on the scene, the tactical folks that were on the scene, and a community member. A special shout out to a community member, and he knows who he is, but it was a community member who pointed out, I think the shots are coming from that particular location there, and we were able to put snipers in place to really lay eyes on where the location was. And once we were able to lay eyes on that, our Secret Service teams, our MPD SWAT team was able to get really laser focusing on a particular unit, and that really helped us. The timely information, that timely support that we got from community was critical in identifying the location where this person was before we were able to really have a thorough assessment of who Mr. Spencer was. A community member was able to point some things out that helped us tremendously. So that being said, I will turn it over to you guys for any questions that you might have. Yes, sir.
The question I haven't heard spoken about is why. Any idea why you did it and why you chose this location?
That's something that we're still searching for. We know that he went and started, while this was going on, manipulating a Wikipedia page for the school. And I'm not sure why he did that exactly. I suspect that as we exploit some of his device, his computer, and some other activity online, I think we may know a little bit more at that point. You know, it's easy when you have a suspect who leaves behind a manifesto or something like that, and they kind of tell you why they did what they did. But in this particular case, you know, he left his fingerprint behind, he left his name behind, but I'm hopeful that we'll get to that. No one has come forward, his family has not suggested any reason why he did this. And it's a you know, I've talked to some parents up at Edmund Burke School, and, you know, when I have to look a parent in the face and, you know, try to answer the question for them, like, Chief, you know, is it safe to send my kid back to school? Do we know why? And I wish I could tell them I knew exactly why, but I honestly, I don't know that answer yet. But we're not going to stop until we find out why. And I think that the more we can talk about the story, again, this is Washington, D.C. A lot of times things happen and we just kind of move on with life. But I think it's important to continue to tell this story and talk about it. And hopefully, as we talk about this, if there are people out there who have interacted with him or had communication with him, that someone may come forward and share some information that might help us get to that why. So thank you for the question.
Chief.
Mark?
So a couple of questions.
Sure.
One, do you know, I know you're looking into his finances, a lot of the neighbors have been speculating that he was on a voucher in the ABA, that neighborhood apartment building from maybe DHS or DA. Do you know if he was actually paying, if he was on a voucher?
It doesn't appear that he was on a voucher, Mark. It appears that he was paying. We're looking at, in some of the financial stuff that I've seen so far, you know, I mean, he had one credit card bill for $10,000, $8,000, $7,000, but how he's paying his rent, you know, that's additional information that we're waiting to come in. And once we have that, that might help give us some insight into some things. It appears that he made his payments online. So again, those things are trackable and traceable, and we'll get to the bottom of that.
And then in one of the photos, it appeared to be cash. Was that?
Yes.
Can you tell us how much that was or what that represented? Or?
I don't remember how much it was, but it was just the cash that he had on hand inside of the apartment. Again, it's when I say sparsely decorated, I mean that bed and those tables are probably the most, along with about 3 items of clothing, I think, that were hung up in the closet. And then that money, right? And where did that, you know, where did the cash come from? As we get into, as Detective Branson mentioned, as we get into really looking at his financial transactions over the course of at least the last year, I think that that's probably going to reveal some things that may help us out a little bit. But I don't have any more than that. And he was not one of these voucher. He was not a voucher recipient.
Was it a significant amount of cash that was laid out? Was it laid out like that, or did you guys?
No, we laid it out like that to really just capture what we had in there. I don't know, and of course, right, we can speculate, right? I don't know if in his mind, like, okay, if I get out of here, I need cash on hand to be able to move around and not make any credit transactions, trackable.
that today on the steps of the Capitol, we will be observing 1 million deaths from COVID. My understanding is the President's lowering flags at half-staff. We will have, sadly, our regular coming together in prayer and song. Many people have died. It's such a terrible toll. And when you think of what it means in the lives of those families, so we send, of course, our condolences to the families, the children, the siblings, the friends, the colleagues, the spouses of those lost. The heartbreak continues. All the more reason why we must pass the COVID legislation so we can purchase vaccines, provide testing and treatments to prevent the outbreak from other variants that may come along, and deaths. Today, as a source of pride to us, Tuesday was a source of pride to us because that is when we passed the $40 billion legislation for our assistance in military, humanitarian, and economic assistance to the people of Ukraine. As you know, I was there recently with a very distinguished delegation. The meeting started by the President thanking our President and the American people for the support to Ukraine as they fight for democracy in their country, and it is a fight for democracy globally. Excuse me. The President was most appreciative, but also had some other requests in terms of weapons, in terms of humanitarian and economic assistance. That's what we have largely in this legislation, which should be coming up in the floor in the Senate anytime, and we'll be able to pass the bill and send it to the President. We think it's a very complete piece of legislation. I salute our Appropriations Committee Chair, Rosa DeLauro, in a bipartisan way, House and Senate coming together on the bill. We're very pleased that we had about an 80% bipartisan bill on the House floor for this, so it is bringing us together. Then again, in addition, as we support the fight for democracy against dictatorship, we also salute the bipartisan support we've had for the Lend-Lease bill, which the President signed, the Seize and Freeze legislation, which is so important in terms of using Russian assets to rebuild Ukraine. And again, we just had on Tuesday also a meeting of the Munich Security Conference. We took part of it here in the Capitol, where we saw the unity of the European countries around this issue. And it really goes beyond European countries. Next week on the floor of the House, we will have another piece of our lowering costs for the American people legislation. First, House Democrats led by Congresswoman Schreier and Congresswoman Porter introduced the Consumer Fuel Price Gouging Prevention Act. While families are struggling to pay higher prices at the pump, oil and gas companies are recording record profits, with 7 largest oil companies announcing buybacks that could total $41 billion this year alone. Again, we see gas prices rise, sometimes when the cost of oil drops, oil prices drop, and price gouging needs to be stopped. This is a major exploitation of the consumer, because this is a product the consumer must have. Again, the Putin tax hike at the pump is a part of this, and you would think that the oil companies would compensate for that rather than exploit the opportunity that it. So what this bill does, price gouging needs to be addressed, including new tools at the FTC to address those abuses. Our bill enables the President to issue an energy emergency declaration, making it unlawful to increase gas and home energy prices in an exploitative and excessive way, which is part of the business plan of these companies. Right now, as we gather here, the Competes Act is having, the conference committee is having its first meeting. I think it's on station 83, channel 83 for anyone who has channel 83 in the world. We are focused on signing this cost-cutting legislation, Make It in America, to the president as soon as we can. Competes is cost-lowering anti-inflation bill. We are so dependent on foreign products, factors of production to do our own manufacturing, and that it increased cost. So this has $52 billion in the Competes Act for chips. We've had this conversation before, 1,000 chips in a car, 2,000 in an electric car. In order to continue manufacturing cars, we need to have more chips, we need to be self-sufficient, independent, make it in America with the chips. $45 billion supply, and that's semiconductors as well. $45 billion to address supply chain issues. The less product, the higher the less supply, the higher the cost. So we want to increase supply in the supply chain to lower costs for the American people. And again, it bolsters research and education and strengthening apprenticeship programs and the rest, again, strengthening America's U.S. global economic leadership. 134 industry groups, some of which have never been on the same side of us in many of these bills. Our office will tweet you their contact, but this is pages and pages and pages of organizations that support the bill. By and large, it is bipartisan. We do have some differences, which we will reconcile in the conference committee. So we're very excited about that. As a piece of it, I talked about workforce development and the rest. Next week, we'll also have the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which more specifically goes to the point that President Biden has, under his leadership, a record of 8.3 million jobs are created. But in March, it was said that 11.5 job positions were open. This legislation will connect workers to jobs at lower cost, increase paychecks, and help small businesses in this economy. So again, lower prices for all Americans at the pump, at the kitchen table, and across the board. It's my sadness always to talk about Roe v. Wade and what this draft decision is, how harmful it is, how dangerous it is for women and families across the country. Yesterday, Senate Republicans lined up in lockstep behind Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump to vote to rip away the constitutional right to health freedom from American women across the country. Across the country. Every day, Republicans show their intention to punish and control women's most personal health reproductive decisions. The GOP-appointed Supreme Court put there for the purpose. You know, in our country, we have always had, because of the brilliance and genius of our Constitution, an expansion of freedom. With this possible, or the suggested draft, would be the first time a court has expanded freedom and then contracted it in a very, very dangerous way. Republicans in Congress across the nation are mobilizing around a dangerous extremist agenda to criminalize all forms of reproductive health, including in vitro fertilization, post-miscarriage care, contraception. Make no mistake, once Republicans shred their law, they have shredded any commitment to precedent, despite saying that they support precedent, and privacy, which is fundamental, by saying certain things are not specifically mentioned in the Constitution. Well, that was the beauty of the Constitution, that it gave the opportunity to further increase our decision-making. As Republicans seek to criminalize women's health and reproductive freedom, Democrats are fighting to defend Roe v. Wade and our fundamental constitutional rights. Tomorrow morning, House Democrats will gather on the steps of the Capitol across the street from the Supreme Court to shine a light on this life and death threat. And over the weekend, Americans across the country will lead days of action and marching, making their voices heard. Democrats stand with America's women in fighting for our rights and the rights of all Americans, which are on the line. This is so very, very sad. Any questions?
Madam Speaker, on the issue of the baby formula shortage, President Biden is going to speak with manufacturers and retailers later today. We know Congress is expected to hold hearings, but is there anything your caucus is specifically discussing to try to address this?
Well, for a long time, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, the chair of the Appropriations Committee, formerly at one point the chair of the Agriculture Subcommittee, under which much of this falls, nutrition, WIC, and all of that, has been addressing this issue. And when I say addressing, that includes investigating, looking for other possibilities, because in anticipation, just to make sure that something like this would not happen. And we just look forward to what the president has to say. Everybody has suggestions about we make sure it never happens again, and that's important. But right now, the baby's crying, the baby's hungry. We need to address it right now. And I think we have good focus on it. And we'll see what the president has to say. And we have our proposals as well that, as I say, Rosa is taking the lead on. Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that you mentioned here, if you could give us an update on the timing around COVID relief, and then secondly, on abortion protections, what left is there for Democrats to do?
Well, as you've heard me say before, public sentiment is everything. Abraham Lincoln. I think that once women understand across the country what this means to them, this is not a public policy debate that is isolated from the personal impact that it has on the lives of women, whether it's contraception, whether it's in vitro fertilization, whether it's post-miscarriage care, whether it's size and timing of a family. It is personal between a woman, her doctor, her God, her family, not the Supreme Court or the Congress of the United States. So again, it's about how women value their decision making, and we think they do. We have passed the legislation. We've been ready for a long time. And you give me the opportunity to say this. The Senate, I hear some voices out there saying, well, why don't they just do the Republican bill? Well, and the House bill goes beyond Roe v. Wade. No, it doesn't. What it does, it is Roe v. Wade as reaffirmed by Casey. So it's Roe v. Wade and then the further protections and clarifications of Casey. That is what we want to enshrine as law. And so that's what we have to make sure people understand. It's not enough just to pass a bill to have a compromise. It's not a compromise, because what's in the Republican bill would enable states to do very destructive things when it comes to a woman's right to choose. And on COVID, those discussions continue. We must pass COVID. It is absolutely essential to health and well-being of the American people. But on the top of things, we were ready with Ukraine, so we moved with that. Now we must be ready with COVID. And I'm optimistic that we will do that. Yes, let me see. Who hasn't had a question lately? But who's a regular here?
I remember you had mentioned that you thought the cost of the COVID bill would go up because it's not been passed and the situation would become more dire.
Yeah.
Do you have a range in mind? Because the Senate, Mitt Romney has said $10 billion, put his proposal on the floor. I just wonder where you come down on that.
Well, I don't come down on that. I mean, the proposal was $22.5 billion, and that would enable us to meet the needs at home and have $5 billion to meet our global responsibilities, because as we know, none of us is safe unless all of us are safe, and we have a global responsibility. So I start at that figure. And since the $10 billion was discussed, the threat has increased. As some of the Republican senators said, well, if the threat increases, then let's talk about it further. So I think that we should start with what we need. And by the way, that didn't was the end of it. It just depends on the variants and what else happens. But I feel confident that we'll get something done.
Madam Speaker, thank you. As you know, primary season is upon us.
Just in terms of what we're talking about here, in terms of policy, because that's what we're here about. On policy.
On coronavirus, just a follow-up on that. When President Biden took office, there was about 400,000 COVID deaths. Now, as you noted, there's about 1 million. You said Democrats were committed to crushing the virus. President Biden ran on beating COVID. Looking back at this time, do you think there's anything else that you all could have done to prevent this death toll?
I want to salute President Biden for what he has done in the fight against COVID. Made a drastic difference from the denial that our country was in before, and the lack of attention that was given to it. President is paying attention to science, and the governance necessary to deal with it. I'm very proud of what he has done. God knows how bad it would be if he had not taken the actions that he has taken. Okay, this has to be the last question, because we're diverting from the...
I'm wondering why you're supporting Henry Cuellar in his Texas runoff. You have long maintained that House members should have the highest ethical standards, but he had his house, as you know, raided by the FBI just several weeks ago.
Well, let me just thank you for the question. I'm supporting Henry Cuellar. He's a valued member of our caucus. The FBI has said he is not under investigation, and so it's up to his constituents to make the decision to send him to Congress. I thought you were going to take it to choice or something. He is not pro-choice, but we denied him. We passed the bill with what we had. And by the way, this is one of the first Congresses that we have had with a Democratic president with a pro-choice Congress. When President Obama was president, the House Democratic Caucus, we didn't have 218 pro-choice votes. That's why the Affordable Care Act was the fight that it was at the end, because there were those on the outside who were saying, oh, it's about, Roe v. Wade and terminating a pregnancy, which it completely was not. But our members, even those who were not pro-choice, understood that that was not what the health care bill was about, but there was an attempt on the outside to paint it that way. Thank God for the nuns. Thank God for the nuns, the Catholic nuns, who supported the legislation and helped us push open that gate to pass that legislation. Thank you all very much. Now we have 9 heads of state from the ASEAN visiting. The president has called a meeting of ASEAN here in D.C., and we are welcoming them to the Capitol. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. We ready to go? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming out today. I would like to thank you and invite you to House Republican National Police Week. We're going to have a press conference. Normally hosted, it would have been hosted by my friend Congressman Kat Kammack. She's wrapping up some work on the House floor, so I'll be here, Greg Murphy, just starting things off. Ladies and gentlemen, we're all here ultimately because we want safe and secure communities for our friends, families, and businesses. Today we need to address two of the biggest issues that are facing law enforcement today: rising crime and Biden's border crisis. The Biden administration has now had a record-setting crime wave that is a serious threat to our nation's security. Homicides are up 30% in 2020 alone, which demonstrates the single largest annual increase since these statistics have been kept beginning 60 years ago. In 2021, murders jumped an amazing and horrific 5%. A dozen liberal cities have homicide records since Joe Biden came into office. It is safe to say that our law enforcement is facing an uphill battle. If homicides, drug seizures, gang activity, aggravated assaults, and thefts were not enough, our police force are witnessing left-wing socialists calling for an end to policing. There is undoubtedly a correlation between Democratic anti-police rhetoric and attacks on our law enforcement agents. Under Biden, attacks on law enforcement and enforcement fatalities have set all-time record highs, with death rates now up 59% from 2020 levels. These tragic, deplorable, and unacceptable measures must be stopped. The left's defund the police movement is a massive threat to public safety. When Republicans take back the House, we will make public safety and law enforcement a very high and if not top priority. The horrific problem that we are experiencing is a wide open, porous southern border. Law enforcement is having to combat self-inflicted crises brought on by the Biden's open border agenda. In fact, the CDC yesterday reported for the first time 107,000 deaths occurred from opioid overdoses last year, up 15% from 2020, affecting disproportionately minority communities. In just a matter of days, Biden is set to repeal Title 42, one of the last remaining lines of defense against Biden's open border. It is completely unconscionable and unforgivable. According to CBP data, there were 221,000 migrant encounters last month alone. This is a new Biden-era high. More than 7,000 migrants are crossing the border every day. That's before Title II is removed. In addition, more than 2.4 million immigrants have been apprehended on our border, with 42 being on the terrorist screening list. Enough fentanyl has crossed into our country now to kill every single American 7 times over. The fact that Biden's progressive base wants to defund the police and abolish the police movement is one of our nation's greatest security issues. My colleagues and I are here today to show our support of law enforcement, and because we value public safety and the heroes in our community who keep us safe. I would encourage our Democratic colleagues to actually do the same. I would like to personally welcome two of my most appreciated sheriffs in the district, coming from Eastern North Carolina. First, I would like to recognize Sheriff Asa Buck from Carteret County and Sheriff Chip Hughes from Craven County in North Carolina. These are two of our most outstanding law enforcement agents that keep us safe in Eastern North Carolina. Their unwavering commitment is a shining example of the excellence, professionalism, and bravery that's been expected and exuded by law enforcement. Gentlemen, we thank you for your work. We thank you for being here today. They came all the way up from Eastern North Carolina to help us recognize National Police Week. Please know that Eastern North Carolina is grateful and deeply appreciative of your service and your presence here today. It is important to note that in North Carolina we celebrate and appreciate our law enforcement agents. Unfortunately, that many here in Washington, D.C. still want to defund or abolish the police. Let me assure you that these patriotic sheriffs, Congresswoman Kammack, and the rest of my colleagues behind me will not stand for this nonsense, and will definitely repeal this nonsense when we take the House back this fall. Protecting our communities should not be a political issue, and now more than ever, Congress must show our gratitude and appreciation for all of our law enforcement agents. In the National Police Week, I'm proud to recommit our total and complete support for law enforcement, and we back the blue. Thank you very much. I would like to introduce my fine colleague from the great state of Indiana, Representative Jim Banks.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy, and thank you to Kat Kamak for organizing this important press conference today. Thank you to all of my colleagues who I am joined by here today, but most importantly, thank you to the members of law enforcement who have joined us for this important occasion. I have tremendous respect for you and the work that you do. Police work is honorable work, very honorable work. On Monday, as chairman of the Republican Study Committee, the largest conservative caucus on Capitol Hill, I sent a memo to my Republican colleagues about America's crime crisis. In 2020, Democrats declared war on the police. They defunded and they disrespected our law enforcement officers. In 2 years, the murder rate has skyrocketed by a record 35%. And the retirement rate among police officers leaped 45% the past 2, and nearly 1 in 5 police officers have resigned over that period of time. In 2021, attacks against our police officers rose by 91%. Fentanyl seizures increased by 134%. And 11 major American cities broke their homicide records in 2021 alone. The American people are desperate for answers and leadership. It's clear that Democrats are the pro-crime party, and it's up to Republicans to make America safe. The Republican Study Committee and my conservative colleagues in the House are working on many initiatives, including to protect qualified immunity by passing my bill to codify these legal protections for our police officers. I'm proud that the Indiana State Police Association endorsed my piece of legislation. In the past 3 years, Democrats have voted twice to strip officers of their qualified immunity protections. This is a direct attack on police officers' livelihoods that would expose them to frivolous lawsuits from criminals and far-left nonprofits. The Republican Study Committee and my colleagues here with me today are working also to end no-cash bail by stripping federal funds from states that release violent criminals before their trial date. This is important, and Republicans are the ones who are leading the way to make America safe and secure and to support our law enforcement officers, and I appreciate your time today. With that, I yield to my colleague from Louisiana, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, brother. God bless you all. Thanks for being here today. We recognize police officers and law enforcement professionals from sea to shining sea. This is a brotherhood that it carries to the depth of our souls those of us that have sworn an oath and worn a badge. On Tuesday of this week, just 2 days ago, I buried a police officer brother who was gunned down in an ambush. Was shot in the stomach, the chest, and the head by an evil man. He suffered unspeakably, he and his family, as he struggled to survive. The Lord called him home. We buried him on Tuesday. This story is repeated across the country in communities of every state. Crime has increased in a manner many of us never imagined possible. And that is a reality we'll witness. In respect to my colleagues' time, I'll be very brief. You pay attention to the criminals across the country. You might think you're on the street, but you do not. You're enjoying a little run right now. Some policies are encouraging your behavior and covering your actions. But you have men and women behind badges across the country that are not running. The streets belong to the law-abiding Americans that we serve. And we're not going away. You've been fairly warned. Thank you, Ms. Cat, for arranging this today, and God bless my colleagues and my fellow brothers of the Thin Blue Line that stand with us today. Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Tough to follow Mr. Higgins, for sure. Thank you to all my colleagues, and thank you to my friend, Dr. Murphy, for kicking us off here today. I apologize, we were wrapping up debate on protecting our TSA workers. So, first and foremost, thank you to the team and my colleagues for joining us here today, but also to our law enforcement who have joined us here today for this press conference, but also for Police Week in our nation's capital. For the press that's here today, thank you. You don't probably hear that a lot, but thank you for covering this. Because it seems like these days there's not a whole lot of coverage, at least positive coverage, for our first responders, our law enforcement, and their families. So thank you. I stand here today not just as a representative of the 3rd Congressional District in Florida, the Gator Nation, but as the wife of a first responder. As many of you know, my husband Matt is a 15-year firefighter and SWAT medic serving the city of Gainesville. Together we have seen the assault on our brothers and sisters in blue and green who have bravely protected our communities and who have been under assault by our national leaders, political parties, and politically motivated organizations. Over the last year and a half of this administration, the Biden administration and congressional Democrats have falsely claimed that Republicans want to quote-unquote defund police. I have never heard more BS in my life. You want to talk about political spin? It's at the White House. It's the Democrats who are on the House floor screaming defund police. It is the Democrats that want to take our law enforcement officers out of our streets. Meanwhile, while they pay for private security to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars in private security, but for an average American, everyday citizen, they clearly, in the eyes of the Democrats, do not deserve the same protection. That's BS. Crime is on the rise across America, in every city, in every community. In 2020, we experienced a 30% increase in murders, the single largest annual increase since we started keeping crime statistics. Murders of law enforcement officers hit an all-time high last year, with rates up to 59% from 2020, including unprovoked attacks, officer ambushes, and other violent attacks against our men and women in blue. And you know, when you just have to sum it up, last year was the deadliest year for law enforcement on record. Up here in our nation's capital, I have members of my law enforcement community, some of whom have served for decades. They tell me they have never seen it this bad. In fact, just about a month ago, in Marion County, Florida, 2 pounds of fentanyl was found. It's a brick. And on that brick was a stamp of a border cartel member. That is enough fentanyl to kill every man, woman, and child in Marion County, Florida. It's not a small county. It's not rural. We have seen enough fentanyl come across our southwest border to kill every man, woman, and child in America multiple times over. And as those drugs cross the border, they make their way into our communities where our frontline workers, like our brave men and women in uniform, are then dealing with it. If you can't defend your homeland, you cannot protect our hometowns. And as these drugs are making their way further inland, further into our country, these men and women who are brave enough to put on a badge, put on a vest, and go out every single day not knowing if they're going to make it back, they are at risk because there is no such thing as an average traffic stop. There is no such thing as a normal average working day for our men and women in blue and green. So as we celebrate and give tribute to our law enforcement who put it all on the line every single day, as we pay tribute and thank their families for their service, and we remember those that gave the ultimate sacrifice. Thank them. Remember them. Remember what is at stake here. Behind us is the United States Capitol, and today we have half of a chamber that wants to defund police, and they want to let criminals on the streets. And we stand here today to say hell no. I want to associate myself with the remarks from Representative Higgins, former law enforcement officer himself. We are taking back our streets, and it starts this November. With that, I would like to yield to Sheriff Nels from the great state of Texas.
Thank you, Kat. Very well said. You know, there's a war going on, my dear friends, and I'm not talking Ukraine. I'm talking about the war on our streets right here in America. There's a war on law enforcement, but it's just not law enforcement. It's a war that's taking American lives each day at an alarming rate with no end in sight. Criminals across the country have been given free rein by corrupt liberal DAs and justices, and our law enforcement and citizens are paying the ultimate price for it. Over 120 officers have been shot in the line of duty this year alone. 19 of those officers have been killed, and the far left is pouring more fuel on the fire. Every level of government. Homicide rates and violent crime in our nation's large cities are breaking records, and make no mistake, under the leadership of Democrat mayors and city councils. In my great state of Texas, DAs backed by liberal billionaires like George Soros are indicting good officers in Dallas and releasing criminals in Houston. Instead of backing our brave officers, liberals are actively working against them. This puts us all at risk, folks. Puts us all at risk. And as a former sheriff, I'm disgusted with the state of our country under Democrat rule. Our brave men, women, and girls, and their families make countless sacrifices every day to protect our communities. The media, the liberal Democrats, will pay the sacrifice with liable attacks and false narratives. The assault on our law enforcement officers must end. This starts by boosting our law enforcement force. That is why I introduced the Public Safety Enhancement Act to put 100,000 officers into our communities and make America safer and more prosperous. My bill has over 75 co-sponsors, with 8 of those being Democrats. I highlight this point because Democrats say they are not the party of defund the police. I beg to differ. Their actions speak louder than words. Only 8 Democrats when there are 221 of them. This is disturbing enough, but when I asked Judiciary Chairman Nadler for a hearing on my bill, he told me the schedule was full. Schedule's full. That said it all. The American people have recognized that the far left, defund the police, George Soros-funded radical DAs and judges are responsible for the crime crisis we have in America. The Democrats are great at pointing fingers. They blame law enforcement. They blame MAGA and gun owners for this increase in violent crime, which could be no further from the truth. I and my colleagues will continue to stand with law enforcement across our country. Our nation's people, the American people, black, brown, and white, count on these brave men and women to keep them safe. If only the left would stop bullying and targeting our brave law enforcement officers and start supporting them with legislation as they have introduced. And I want to leave with a message to criminals out there who are attacking our law enforcement officers. Stop attacking us. Stop attacking us. Don't hold court on the side of the road. Stop fighting and start complying. Because if you comply, you will not die. If you comply, you will not die. I hand it off to a great congressman out of Illinois, Congressman Mike Boss.
Thank you, Troy. So each one of us here have, whether it's out there or over here, have friends and family that wear the blue. I in particular have a son-in-law who's a deputy sheriff in Jackson County, Illinois. And so National Police Week is very personal to me and my family, my grandchildren. Our nation's police officers deserve the thanks and the gratitude every day, every week, every year, not just this week and this month alone. But all too often, they're demonized by those of our colleagues on the left. The Liberals' Defund the Police program and agenda has pushed forward and into our communities and our states. I know of radical positions that were taken by the state legislature in the state of Illinois that made it to where it's very difficult for police officers to actually want to become police officers and others to want to stay police officers. The rhetoric that is emboldened the criminals and now putting brave officers' lives are in danger. In 2021, 73 officers were killed in the line of duty. That's the highest number in 26 years. That includes 2 officers from my district, Brian Pierce Jr. and Tyler Timmons. Tyler was gunned down by simply making a traffic stop. It wasn't even a traffic stop. There was a car pulled over on the side of the road on the interstate in a rural area. These families are devastated, and our prayers go out to them, and we thank them for the grateful service of the family members that they've lost, but we also say thank you to all of those who serve today in every way. You know, here's what's amazing. Despite everything that I said and everything that my colleagues said, the men and women are still running towards the crime to do their job. That is amazing. You know, we need to respect them and thank them every day. I'll always stand with those who wear the blue, the men and women of law enforcement, and I hope that when you understand that when we take the majority back, this rhetoric will stop. And to my Democrat colleagues, I say stop it now. Stop it today. Let's get back to supporting the police officers, men and women who serve us, the way we did before this craziness took control of this House. With that, I need to yield to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Arrington.
I want to thank the leadership of my dear friend from Florida, Kat Kamek, and our colleagues here who are gathered to show our love and our appreciation and our profound respect and honor to those men and women in law enforcement, the brave men and women, our heroes, our guardian angels. You know, when I reflect on the last couple of years and all that law enforcement has had to endure, it reminds me of that biblical statement, that warning, woe to the nation whose leaders call good evil and evil good. These folks, these law enforcement officers have faced an onslaught of undue criticism and have been unjustly denigrated by the media and many in the Democrat Party. The left's unrelenting efforts to sow lawlessness and the Democrat cries for defunding the police have made our families less safe, our communities and our country more divided, and our society weakened. I can't believe 123 police officers were shot last year. Where's the outcry? Where's the sense of urgency from our Democrat colleagues and our friends on media? Last year alone, 73 police officers were killed in the line of duty. Where's the outcry? Folks, we get what we tolerate. And the Democrats have failed to denounce the violence taken through our streets. They have not condemned our lawlessness and engulfing our communities. And by their silence during the riots, they were complicit. So, we stand with the law enforcement community, we back the blue, and we thank God for the men and women who give us domestic tranquility and peace and safety for our communities. God bless our law enforcement agencies, and God bless America. And now, I turn the podium over to my friend from Washington State, Dan Newhouse.
Thank you, Jody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arrington. And I want to also thank Ms. Kamek of Florida for bringing us all together today as we honor the men and women in blue across our country, the men and women who take an oath to protect and defend our communities, the men and women who deserve nothing less than our full support, including my own daughter who serves my hometown community of Sunnyside. As you know, crime has skyrocketed thanks in large part to the Biden administration's anti-police policies and certainly rhetoric. This has tied the hands of law enforcement, actually behind their backs, and has placed the lives of our communities and police officers at great risk. I'm sad to say that in Washington State, legislators there have taken a page out of the Biden administration's handbook and have passed legislation that denies our law enforcement the ability to do their jobs, to detain, to pursue, and to investigate criminal activity. And guess what? Not surprisingly, this has led to an 88% increase in vehicle thefts across my state. To make matters worse, police officers are being targeted while doing their jobs around the country. Just last year, 617 officers were killed in the line of duty. That's according to the Officer Down Memorial page. This is tragic. This is unacceptable. I and my colleagues are proud to stand with our law enforcement officers who work every day to protect us. And we will never stop working to help them gain the tools that they need to keep our families and to keep our communities safe. And now I'd like to turn the microphone over to the lady from Missouri, Ms. Vicki Hartzler.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Kat, for putting this together. And thank you, gentlemen, for your service to our nation, to your communities, for your bravery. But I'd like to go a little different direction in my remarks. I want to highlight the difference between the ideology of our past and our current commanders-in-chief. When President Trump took office, he issued an executive order to bolster our law enforcement. When Biden took office, his party tried to dismantle and defund our men and women in blue. And now we're seeing firsthand the impact of these disgraceful actions and dangerous rhetoric on our law enforcement officers. Last year alone, nearly 90 were killed in the line of duty, including in Missouri. Police officer Blaze Madrid Evans lost his life while responding to a call when a criminal opened fire and killed him. Detective and military veteran Antonio Valentine Sr. was killed in the line of duty when a criminal crashed into his vehicle during a high-speed vehicular pursuit. And even as recently as last March, 3 officers right outside my congressional district, Corporal Benjamin Lee Cooper, Officer Jake Alexander Reed, and Patrolman Lane Anthony Barnes, lost their lives in violent attacks. There is no doubt in my mind that the hatred and vitriol of law enforcement spread by the media and those in elected positions played a role in the upticks of attacks of our officers. This must stop. Our words have real consequences. That is why it is so important to take back the narrative of how Americans treat and think about our law enforcement officers. Not as the enforcers of law, but as the protectors of our inalienable God-given rights. Let's be clear. Police officers are the blue line between law-abiding citizens and a world of lawlessness. Police officers are the ones who run to danger when everyone else is running away. Police officers leave their families each morning to protect ours. Police officers are heroes. We owe them our gratitude and our respect, nothing less. And now I'd like to introduce and turn this over to my colleague, there he is, Representative Allen from Georgia. Thank you, Vicki.
Well, thank you, Vicki, and I thank you, Congressman Kamak, for organizing this important time to recognize National Police Week. You know, law enforcement is not a new idea. It's been around for thousands of years. In fact, God ordained government, and gentlemen, He ordained you for the sole purpose of restraining evil. And you know, if our colleagues who are elected to Congress were well versed in the scriptures, Romans is very clear. There is no authority except that which God has established. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has actually instituted. We say above our flag, in God we trust. The brave men and women of law enforcement understand and embrace the authority with which they have been called, and they swear an oath to execute it faithfully. To the upstanding members of law enforcement, we salute you, and as Republicans, we will always back the blue. As I said, by contrast, the Democrats are soft on crime. They have screamed the defund the police rhetoric. They've led a dramatic rise in violent crime, including record-breaking homicides in major cities nationwide. And as we mark this occasion, we pause to honor those police officers who have been killed in the line of duty. Again, the scriptures say, the greatest love that my friends here offer is to offer their life up for me and others standing here, and you. Our police officers put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. They don't do it for recognition. They deserve our recognition and our full and total support. Thank you, and I yield back. To Mr. Brian Babin, my friend from Texas. I yield to Mr. Brian Babin.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that. Thank you very much. Kat Kamak, thank you for having this. I really appreciate it. Defunding the police means defunding the police. These are the words of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This sentiment has been echoed by most of the left and the Democrats, who have blindly supported the radical and irresponsible push to defund and dismantle police departments across this great nation for nearly 2 years. Yes, despite Biden's denials, Democrats own the defund the police narrative and the country's current crime wave washing over this nation. It's no wonder why homicide rates across America have surged 48%, or that shootings of police officers have increased 38% just since 2020. We've repeatedly seen Democrat judges release dangerous people on bail for violent crimes like murder. It's happening in my district in Houston, Texas, every single day. What do these criminals do once they're released? They go back out on the streets and they hurt innocent Americans who are minding their business, paying their taxes, raising their kids, and trying to make their communities a better place. They're out of touch with our American people. The majority of Americans love and support our men in blue and our women in blue. We want our streets and cities protected. We want criminals where they should be, behind bars, to stay there, to serve out their full sentences. We don't want DAs that fail to prosecute, or judges turn people loose on personal recognizance, even capital murderers, suspects, let them out to go kill again. Today and every day, we want to thank law enforcement for the courageous work that they do to keep us all safe. We must always back the blue. Thank you. And Representative Style from Wisconsin.
All right.
Okay.
We're jumping around. This is good. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's great to be here on National Police Week. It's a time to reflect and remember those men and women of law enforcement who gave up their lives to protect our freedom. Thousands of men and women across this country wake up every morning, put the badge across their heart, and go out the door knowing that they're going to answer the call, but not knowing the call that's going to come. I remember vividly, I did a police ride-along in Racine County, and we got in the car, and moments after we pulled out, a call came across the radio that shots had been fired and an officer's car had been hit. To me, it was a clear reminder of the danger that the men and women of law enforcement put themselves in every day to keep us safe. 2 years ago, we saw a scourge of people across this country espousing anti-police rhetoric. And we're dealing with the consequences of that still to this day. Not only with recruitment, to make sure that we're bringing in the best and the brightest to serve in law enforcement across this country, but also with a significant rise in crime in cities across this country. In the city of Milwaukee, 197 people were murdered last year. And crime continues to increase not only in Milwaukee, but in cities across this country. It's time that we turn the corner on this anti-police rhetoric, and that we stand with those men and women of law enforcement, and that we back the badge. So it's an honor to be here today, and to thank the men and women of law enforcement today on National Police Week. And now I yield now to my good friend John Joyce from Pennsylvania.
Amen. First of all, thank you to Representative Kamek for arranging this today. And I think we owe a gratitude for the sheriffs, and we as members of Congress need to stand shoulder to shoulder with you and support in National Police Week those who defend us, the men and women in blue who do this day and night to allow us to enjoy this great land. Law enforcement officers here today are front line. They fight in this crime crisis that is only being accentuated by the opioid crisis and the porous southern border that is allowing opioids, fentanyl, to continue to come into our country, making every state a border state. I know that the sheriff is nodding in agreement with me because he faces it every single day. So what's our obligation here in Congress? What's our responsibility? Our responsibility is to make sure that the men and women in blue have the necessary resources to protect us. Our responsibility here in Congress is to make sure that they have the adequate tools, the adequate training to make sure that this is truly the great American country that every opportunity should allow it to become. We owe gratitude to the men and women in blue who are fighting to keep the drugs off the street. But right now, we've heard from my colleagues, this is an uphill battle. We owe gratitude to the officers who walk the patrol. We owe to the state troopers who protect our highways. And we certainly owe to the sheriffs who respond to the 911 calls in the middle of the night to help a woman struggling with domestic violence or to stop an armed robbery. We all recognize that the rising rate of crime in our cities is incredibly troubling. And it will take well-funded, well-trained law enforcement community to protect the neighborhoods where we live and where we work.
in the shadows of the United States Capitol, meeting these brave officers here today and the officers in my district in Pennsylvania, I am confident that they are up to the task. I encourage all Americans, join with me. Back the men and women in blue. Pray for them. Pray for them as they defend you, as they protect you. May God continue to bless them, and may God continue to bless these great United States of America. Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And now, I yield to Representative Amalfa.
Good afternoon. I want to start off by saying my gratitude to all of our officers across the country. Gentlemen, thank you for being here, being part of this, and putting a real face on what we're doing here today. So, as a California representative, we certainly have our challenges there. As my colleagues have emphasized beforehand, crime rates are rising exponentially under President Biden and the Democrats' one-party rule. Their soft-on-crime attitudes have including early release policies, which are rampant in my home state of California, and calls to defund police departments. How absurd is that? Let's defund the police departments at a time when crime is increasing. Yet it's almost humorous if it wasn't so sad to watch these cities that about 2 years ago started defunding, and now they have to go meekly back and say, oh, we need to put the funding numbers back up once again. Where are there people holding those politicians accountable that made these decisions? I hope they're held strongly accountable at the polls. So we've seen the strongest crime rate in blue cities and indeed across our whole country. And on top of that, a record number of officers have been lost in the line of duty due to this attitude, due to this opportunity for these criminals. Of course, many more are injured in the process as well. So of course our hearts go out to all these families that have lost loved ones with their loss on especially this National Police Week. A little bit earlier I had the opportunity to go lay a wreath at the National Police Memorial just downtown here. The wreath I had 6 ribbons on it from officers lost in recent years in my area of Northern California. Those are all real people, real families, and I know many of them. I pray for their safety continued as they put it on the line every day out there. They don't know what's behind that next car door, but behind that next front door, or whatever it is they respond to. That's why they have to be trained. That's why they have to have the ability to act with that training in ways to be able to combat the unknown. I don't think it's fair that our law enforcement or personnel are expected to put their lives on the line while the lawmakers, whether it's in Sacramento, my home state, or here in the U.S. Capitol, are doing everything they can to make crime fueled even more so, even more, with early releases. We have these measures known as California, for example, is Prop 47, the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. That's what they sold to the voters as a proposition, which indeed downgraded crimes from felonies to misdemeanors and had more releases of hardened criminals. Once you get one put in prison, they want to let them out that much easier. It's hard to get them put in prison to begin with after you get through the process. Yet they turn them out to commit even more crime and victimize people only days later. Even in a small town like Red Bluff in Northern California, for example, enough fentanyl was found at a single traffic stop to kill up to 16,000 people. So it's up to us in this capital, in the state capitals, on the city councils, to honor our law enforcement officers, not on just a week like this, but at all times, by giving them the tools, the ability, and the backing they need to be able to do their jobs and know that they're not going to be beaten home by the criminals they just arrested and have to deal with them over and over again. So I'm honored to be able to stand with them in my community and here today, and I hope that attitudes in government can turn around quickly to give them the tools and the heart. Because this is doing nothing for their morale, nothing for recruitment. Indeed, they're staying away more and more from entering this honorable occupation. So with that, let's give them the backing and the love they deserve. With that, I'd like to turn over to my colleague, Buddy Carter from Georgia.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you. Well, thank you all for staying here and being here. Look, you've heard from a lot of people today, and pretty much you've heard the same theme all throughout this. And it's an important theme, and that is that we have to support our police. That is that we appreciate them, and I appreciate both of you, and I appreciate your colleagues and everything they do. For folks, this morning I was over at the National Law Enforcement Memorial. I was there because I wanted to honor a policeman from my district who 3 years ago yesterday was killed in the line of duty. 3 years ago yesterday. You know, I went to work that day thinking that he put his uniform on, he went to work thinking he was going to help people, and he did help people. But he was shot and he was killed in the line of duty. He was called to investigate a burglary at a barber shop. When he went on, a guy started shooting. Later on, the guy escaped. He got out. He shot this police officer, Sergeant Kelvin Osari. He shot him and killed him. Later on, he went and he hid in a shed behind the building. When other officers came, he came out with his guns ablazing, and yes, they killed him. I remember going to his funeral. I remember the outpouring of support from the community. But you know what I remember the most? I remember his wife, and I remember his 4 children that he left behind. I remember his service to our community, to our country, keeping us safe, just like these officers do every day. The thing today is we support them. We appreciate them. And we're going to show it. We're going to fund them. We're going to make sure they have all the tools and the assets that they need to be able to do their job. You know, policies matter. Words matter. The rhetoric that comes from the other side of the aisle that they're going to defund the police, that serves to only embolden to encourage these criminals. That has to stop. And it's going to stop. I want to thank our law enforcement officers. I want to thank them for what they do day in and day out. You know, I was mayor at one time. And our police force, they always